silence. Just utter and complete silence. And every now and then, a soft sob or a frantic scream. Seeing a community that has just been ripped apart by a natural disaster days or weeks after the fact is one thing, but the first time I was in a neighborhood, only moments after the storm, it was the silence that really got to me. At 4:50 a.m., these homes were a hum of electricity, air conditioning, refrigerators, but by 4:52, nothing. It was erased by an EF3 tornado. And miraculously, no one that day died, but the survivors were still walking around in their pajamas. They're silent, just kind of in shock. But once the shock wore off, searching for friends and family amongst the rubble that really set in. And there was no cell phone service to be had. I was calling, I was trying to get message out, get help. There was nothing, no signal. We had a satellite truck and still nothing. That's not something you think about until it's too late. I'm Kate Parker. I'm a meteorologist with the Weather Company and IBM Business, and every day I report on another disaster from around the world on the Weather Channel app. You see these devastating stories or natural disasters popping up every day in your newsfeed, and perhaps you send silent prayers to those that are involved, but you never really imagine that one day it could be you. Wildfires are not only happening more frequently around the globe, but they're bigger and badder, and the atmosphere is holding more water, making monsoons exponentially worse. Hurricanes and typhoons are creating deadly storm surge that's worsened by our rise in our seas. Our meteorological skill in forecasting, it gets better every day, but we can only do so much. After that tornado, people were in the worst possible moment of their lives, and they had no way to call for help. In that moment, technology fell short. But it doesn't have to. And that's where you come in. Coders can build solutions that can help get us the kind of help that we need during natural disasters. IBM has partnered with the United Nations Human Rights Office, American Red Cross, and Linux Foundation for Call for Code. It's a rallying cry for developers around the world to create a new idea to help save lives in disasters. If I had the skills for code, I would definitely love to see a way to get those people help when cell phones go down. But maybe there are a million other great ideas. What can you do? Get started. Go to callforcode.org. And I may cover these natural disasters, but there are people who have far greater insight into what's needed and how you, the coders, can fill that need. And we're going to talk to them right now. So we're joined now by Jeff Bryant. He's the director for the Center for Disease Control's Division of Emergency Services. In your role, I mean, what's something that people are maybe surprised to find out or don't know about a natural disaster that is an immediate need?
In all natural disasters, the first focus of the response community is life-saving. You know, is there somebody that made it through the initial event that we can save? And after that, then it goes into life preserving. If we can restore electricity, if we can get safe food, safe water to a population, you know, that's only going to help the community recover faster.
But what are some of the challenges? I mean, you have people coming from all over the country, sometimes all over the world, to respond to these disasters, and they may not have all the tools that they need or, or want to have the appropriate response. I mean, are there a number of challenges that you guys have?
There are. I mean, there is chaos often in the immediate hours, days, or even maybe weeks if it's a catastrophic event. And so everything from populations that are displaced, that are having to find temporary living arrangements, having families that were separated because the grandparents live in a different home in a different part of the city or the area. And then for the first responder community, you know, understanding where to focus their efforts first. And so if there's a pocket of survivors, you know, it takes a long time to do a house by house grid search for search and rescue. So if we can pinpoint where the survivors are, that could greatly accelerate the response activities.
When it comes to the call for code, There seems like there's a lot of things that we would have solved by technology by now, or that we should solve. Is there a disconnect between maybe people who have the skills, the developers, and what the needs are of our first responders?
Listen, I think that technology is emerging so quickly that, you know, the collaboration between the developers and the practitioners of response and recovery activities is so important. I mean, even on the preparedness side, before an event occurs, you know, is there a way for us to have dynamic mapping or dynamic modeling where we can better predict the severity? Because if we can better anticipate or predict the severity of an event, then we're going to be able to better do resource allocation, you know, to the highly impacted areas or to the priority areas.
If you like had a wish list, like we could do so much if I just had X, Y, or Z, the ability to, you know, look in a camera and see if a tree's down or whatever it may be. I mean, would that be a pretty long wish list?
I think that there is a role for emerging technologies in the preparedness and the response and recovery spaces. And so we have got to be able to harness these technologies and then scale them to where they're mainstream in a community or in a responder group or group of organizations. And so there is a list of technologies that we think could be very helpful and be enablers for the response and recovery communities. You know, dynamic mapping is just one of these areas, and so our ability to, you know, a lot of patrol cars now, law enforcement, have laptops on the console, and the ability to have a dynamic map that takes sensors from around a community, whether it be cameras at a bank or cameras at an intersection or river gauges, and then taking those images and through image classification, translating that into usable information for responders. So for example, if a camera is showing that there are 3 trees down and traffic is backed up, nobody's getting through, then a first responder can alter their route to get to an impacted area. So, you know, one of the barriers that responders have going into community could be the language barrier. And so, you know, looking at the science around natural language processing and the ability to voice to text or text to text, you know, if I'm in a community where English may not be the primary language, you know, if I could voice to text and have that come out on the other end in a desired language, that would be a huge enabler for responders. And I know these technologies exist, but how do we make them mainstream?
Thank you so much for all of your insight. We
Sure.
really appreciate it.
Yeah.
We're joined now by Subaleka, communications lead for Project Lantern, and you've just been telling me kind of a little bit here about your project, and I'm basically in love. I think it's incredible, but first, can you tell us a little bit about your backstory, because I think it might explain how you came to create such a cool device that we're going to show you in just a second.
So my background, I'm originally from India, but I've lived in the United States for about 15 years now, and my background is in computer science and design, and most of my work for the past 8 years or so has been around how to use technology for human progress, and disaster recovery is something that I've been interested in for many years. And Project Lantern came about really as a team effort, because a lot of people on our team had gone through disasters themselves. I was in the big earthquake that happened in Mexico City last year, and the founder, Jonah Model, who created this, has been working on offline systems for over a decade. So it was really a merging of these two different areas where we realized that when disaster happens, especially last year, so many people were offline, and that time relief and other efforts couldn't reach them. And also there was really no visibility of what was really going on with them.
What was your experience during that earthquake in Mexico City?
I think my initial experience was because you really have no control, and the loss of control and how you deal with it it really pushes and pulls between your emotional and your physical strengths. And then when things are a little bit okay, it even beyond the moment, the next couple of days are much harder because it's complete chaos. Everybody's running around, everybody's trying to solve some problem because we want to give as human beings to other human beings, but really don't know where to give, how to give, because we don't have real structures to do that. And I think during that time I did a lot of research for Project Lantern itself to talk to relief workers as to where did they feel lack of guidance, or what happened, what could be improved. Because a lot of times the infrastructure that you already have, delivery systems you already have, you cannot rely on most of them because everything is constantly changing. And it's different in an earthquake versus a flood. So one thing that became very obvious was that we really do not have any control at that time, and we are used to having a lot of control with technologies right now. Technology tells us when we are going to get picked up and we are going to get dropped off. We can plan our day to the T. But at that moment, it's all gone. So I believe we are not emotionally prepared for it because we rely so much on our cell phones. And at that moment, you have to rely on yourself.
So I think it's fascinating we're talking about this chaos, these moments of both need and the want to help, whether you're the one that's in need or you want to help, and how do you do that whenever what we rely on every single day, our general connectivity as a society, just completely disappears. And I think it's really interesting that you guys have found a solution in something so small. You've got like this little device that is fascinating.
Yeah.
So this is Project Lantern.
Yes. So Project Lantern, I can tell a little bit about it. It's really a keychain sized device. This is completely open source. This is 3D printed case, and within it is the technology. And anybody can assemble it without any kind of prior technological experience. It's a clip-on. And right now it's about, I think it runs about around $50, but then you can assemble. We are hoping that it'll be much less as we go forward because it's a prototype. And what Project Lantern tries to do is achieve two things. One is connect when some people are disconnected, and two is gather data and create visibility around how good or bad the situation is, because one area might need water, but another area might need medicines. So what it does is 6 or 7 of these devices in a town can create connectivity for that entire locality. You connect to Project Lantern via your Wi-Fi, and all it does is deliver this set of apps to you. And what essentially these apps try to do, it gives you sort of like a dashboard, these apps, where you can basically say what supplies you need, are you safe, and you're able to also validate. Let's say you're in a relief camp and you'll see that relief camp is a lot of water, and you're able to say, okay, yes.
So you guys are submitting to Call for Code.
Yes.
And it is, obviously you already have kind of an operational project for offline, but you do kind of want to take this online, right?
Yes. So one thing we realized, at least the first time when we started working on Project Lantern, it was we were very focused on offline situations. But once it's working and once we start to understand that, okay, we are collecting all this data, what do we do with this data now? Now, let's say the internet is back up. Mm-hmm. Or there may even be disaster where the internet didn't go offline even at all, but we still want to use lanterns in those situations. So what can we do with that data that we are collecting? Because it's still a unique and important way to collect data. So what we want to do with Call for Code is really start to use the intelligence that IBM Watson offers to start to use the data as an agent. We want to build a dashboard which is going to have an intelligent agent that helps relief workers. So let's say a relief worker this morning, they're waking up and they're like, okay, I'm going to do these things. They have a dashboard they can look at and say, okay, this is the best route for you to use considering all the supplies that you have, because we know who is in need. And maybe that changes as 2 hours later, maybe that route changes because he starts to get more information, he or she is starting to collect more information, and the agent is starting to say, okay, you know what, we're going to change it out a little bit because more people need something here. Because that's one thing we notice in disasters, it's constantly changing. The landscape is constantly changing. And we also want to make sure the human makes the last decision, because we want the agent to be more like a support system, but definitely not the be-all end-all. So we want to create something that uses that technology as well as the weather technology that we have, so we can basically use that to create better feedback
I have to say, obviously, you are doing the world a lot of good, and this is an incredible product. And I'm glad that there are people like you, and hopefully we have encouraged some others, right, to do some societal good with development skills, with programming skills. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
It's been a pleasure.
Massive destruction. There used to be a basketball court. It was all destroyed. I saw all the destruction. I got more worried. Thankfully, I had my drone, and I visited my parents. They were all right, but my grandma, she was a little bit further away. The roads were closed, so I used my drones to check on her. She actually waved at me. She was all right. So that's where the part of the inspiration came from. SOS messages, if they need water, food. I thought of a way we could standardize these messages. So I started creating a universal language based on icons. During this hackathon, I had the opportunity to learn about machine learning. And in 5 minutes, I was able to upload my images, my custom icons, train the model, and be able to detect and quantify the needs of the citizens. Being able to create machine learning, to create these models in just 5 minutes, that's super powerful.
So we're joined now by Joshua Carr. He's a developer advocate for IBM. And you weren't always this developer. You kind of have an interesting story. Were you in a band?
Yes. I dropped out of education to join a band, and then I dropped out of the band to join education, which is not quite running away to join the circus, but my version of it, which was good. I think when I was 15, 16, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And then I was a drummer for a while, so that's good. And then I decided it was great because actually I really knew what I wanted to do. I'd really kind of found my passion in kind of computers and computer science, and kind of blasted through a whole bunch of education in a really short period of time. And a little bit later, I joined IBM.
As a meteorologist, I watch all these disasters as they happen, forecast for them in advance, but there are so many gaps whenever it comes to technology, whether it's maybe not understanding what the problems are fully and where we could have developers kind of fill in those spaces. But that's what we're trying to do, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That's what we're trying to do with Call for Code. So I think you've been really in touch with the process.
Yes.
What's going on right now with it?
What's going on right now is there is a Call for Code event pretty much multiple times a day. Somewhere in the world, there are thousands of developers from all over the planet thinking about, how do I build a more resilient community? What does that look like? We are talking to developers on Slack, we have them on social, we have them in our IBM Coder program, and day after day we're engaging with people, they're students, they're professionals, they're a bunch of various interesting people, or sometimes it's just someone who has a great idea and doesn't know how to get it out there. Often everyone has one book in them or an award-winning idea, and it's like a lot of people are passionate about this because it affects them directly, or affects their community directly, and they're like, if only this existed, how would I go about doing that? And I think Call for Code empowers the developers to have that conversation with people, and we're seeing thousands of people sign up and register, which is great, and our deadline is extended until the 28th of September. So we're asking people to continue to build until 28th of September. And we're expecting thousands of people.
It sounds like people are answering the call, but are there some more than others that are kind of standing out to you thus far?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's fascinating. Every time I talk to someone, I think I have good ideas. I think most people think that they have good ideas, and
right.
And you talk to someone and you go, wow, that's actually a really smart way of doing that. There's a bunch of developers in Hersley, which is where I'm from, and they are, the first question they said was, well, what happens when the cell towers go down? Which I think is a very, very sensible question to answer. So they are implementing a mesh network where basically everyone who has a phone, you can turn on wireless hotspot, for example. So if everyone in a building or in a community were to turn on wireless hotspot, you essentially create an ad hoc network that everyone can communicate across, which is brilliant. But on top of that, they're then saying, great, so what data should we be transmitting when someone finally finds a cell tower? And essentially what they're doing, a bit like a virus or bacteria, the entire network spreads across everyone in real time and is updated. And then when someone finds a cell tower, that entire network is published to the cloud. And so they're saying, well, what information is vital in this instance. So it's like I'm okay, and this is where I'm at. Okay, so as an individual, I open this app, hit join the mesh network. I'm okay, or I'm not okay, and this is where I'm at. And that gets spread across everyone who's joined. One person submits that up to the cloud. We're using blockchain technologies to make sure that we have the most resilient network possible.
Are there a number of new technologies or interesting ways that people are developing this code and things that they're coming up with?
Yeah, and I think when we were looking at Cool for Code in the early stages, it was like, why do these seemingly obvious solutions don't exist? You know, why do they not exist? Is it because the technology perhaps is still emerging and new? And maybe that's the answer. But also, it's like, are we giving people the right clues in which to use these type of technologies? And so when working with the United Nations Human Rights and the American Red Cross, they kind of clued us into the things that they care about. And we worked and we said, oh, great. We actually think that these type of technologies would be the best way to solve that. So Watson visual recognition, recently we were in Puerto Rico, where a team basically fly a drone, use machine learning to recognize where people are and save them, and help save them. And they built this in a day. And so, you know, visual recognition, speech to text, text to speech. These black box API-driven solutions that we have are super easy to be implemented. And on top of that, what we've done is we've packaged up services that we believe would work well together that fit the needs of the American Red Cross, and we're putting them into something called code patterns. And a code pattern is essentially a foundational application that exists and runs together, all these services running together, and you can instantly deploy it to the cloud. And so you can say, okay, now I understand how all these moving parts work together. What I'm going to do in this visual recognition instance, I'm just going to train the visual recognition, attach, you know, the camera to the drone, and pretty much you're done. So, you know, our Watson services, of which we have tons on IBM Cloud, every single one of them has a tangible implementation in a Cool for Code solution, depending on where you're thinking. We have huge amounts of various database driven solutions, so you can run interesting analytics against it. We have blockchain, which I touched on earlier. And one of the interesting things is we have worked with the weather company to open up their data and their APIs. So for the first time, developers can get essentially for free huge amounts of incredibly
we got big data here.
Yeah. You guys,
a lot of numbers.
You guys have got the numbers,
company.
absolutely. And so, you know, for the first time, we're opening up interesting data sets, global data sets, and we're saying, have at it. Here are the things that we think you might care about, and these are the starting points, which I think a lot of people have resonated. They said, oh, kind of get the creative juices flowing. But realistically, any solution that any developer or any team can come up with that they believe can help save lives, they're building. And it's kind of overwhelming.
Joshua, thank you so much.
Of course, it's been a real
Wealth
pleasure.
of knowledge.
Brilliant, thank you.
So now we're joined by Brian Fanzo. He's the founder of iSocialFans. What is your connection to the developer community?
So, I'm a computer science major that really loves technology and change. And what I kind of figured out was that I'm not the greatest developer or coder, and I'm not one that likes to be disconnected from it. So what I like to say is I translate the geek speak and work with developers to tell their stories, and then work with leadership to better understand what developers are doing. So I kind of play right in the middle between leadership and developers on a day-to-day basis.
What are some of the latest trends that you're seeing within the development community, and how might they apply to Call for Code?
So I think one of the things, especially from a developer, is we understand now that there's all of these changing variables, and I think it moved from a mobile first world to a mobile now world. And then also understanding how do we stay up to date? How do we keep on this treadmill with as much change that's going on? And so one of the trends I see is that developers have to get better at collaborating and figuring out how to not only share what they do, but know how to get kind of connect with the right people. And I think what Call for Code means, and the reason I was excited to kind of work on this project, is that it's how do we bring multiple developers together with multiple different skill sets to together make a bigger movement. I've said for a long time that I think the future of innovation is collaboration, and that collaboration requires developers kind of working together, where I think traditionally developers could work in more of a siloed environment. But with today's pace of change, I think collaboration is essential, and Call for Code is kind of bringing that together in a fun environment.
So Brian, is there anything that has been in your travels kind of stood out to you, impact of a natural disaster that people didn't think about, or something you saw personally that moved you as a need?
For someone, I grew up in United States, and I grew up actually on the ocean in Virginia, and so I was very familiar with hurricanes. I was very familiar with understanding kind of that arena. But as I traveled the United States, I started to be exposed to things and natural disasters that I didn't even know were as impactful. We have tornadoes. My daughters were all born in Arizona, and they have things like haboobs and dust storms. But then going overseas and really seeing not only a different way of doing things. I remember being in Korea when in Seoul, Korea, and they had sounded an alarm because of a storm coming there as well. And I happened to be at a couple places in the UK as disasters were approaching. And I think for me, one of the biggest eye-opening experiences was it's not only about how do we help bring the awareness ahead of time, but it's how do we recover afterwards. And I've been very blessed. I traveled to Iraq and Afghanistan in my career as well, and it's oftentimes how do we prepare for disasters, how do we help during the time of the disaster, and then also how do we help people recover faster. And I think these are all three different arenas that I've been exposed to, and I'm excited to see where we can come together for Call for Code and really make a difference across the board, not just in one of those areas. And that's the power of bringing all these people together, these developers, to change the world.
Do you have tips for people on how to be successful, on how to take that code and make it a successful business model?
Sure. So I think one of the things in today's digital world, it comes down to being able to know what you know, and then surround yourself with people that know what you don't know. And at the same time, it's that self-awareness. So I think as an entrepreneur, you have to be willing to put yourself out there. I know for many developers, that's not traditionally a skill set that they love to embrace. And that's kind of what I get to do for a living, is I get to work with really talented developers and coders and say, okay, this is what you do well, this is your story, let's connect that with other people. And so my advice is, I have a saying, it's just be yourself. I think one of the things that as developers is if you can share your story, connect with others that are also doing some innovative things, and be open to the possibility of what together you could do. I like to think that individually we can be very powerful, but to truly be successful, we have to come together and collaborate as a whole. And I think for entrepreneurs, it's a weird world. For many of us, it feels like it's a solo gig, and we're all, we don't want to work for the man, and we're going and working on our own. But what I've learned, probably more so than anything else, is to be a successful entrepreneur, it's actually more important to collaborate and surround yourself with great people than it is any other time in my life. And I've worked in enterprise, I worked at a startup, and now I run my own business. And really, that understanding of collaboration, but also understanding that it's important to surround yourself with good people. And I think that's what developers that are doing great things today have really figured out.
Is there anything that you wished you would have been able to do better? Like things like, I wish that I had a way to contact people because I need help, or I wish that there was a way for me to know when to evacuate faster or what to take with me. Were there anything missing? Was there anything missing during all of these stories?
So I think one of the things for me that I feel that would be missing, and I would love to see being able to, communication is essential. And we have things like even Facebook where now people can check in that they are safe. But checking in that you are safe is kind of a one-way broadcast, letting people know, hey, I'm okay. But I really think that there needs to be a connection to say, how do we know who is okay, what they need, and then also how can we help? I remember being someone that had a vehicle that could get out of the water, and I wish I knew who was elderly or who had children that were around me, almost to the point where it's saying, okay, here's everybody that's in this area, and this is a priority of who we can help out with. Because I think, as much as we want to rely on, professional services, firefighters and police, oftentimes it's those first responders connecting with locals, to bring a boat there or to help bring, food or water. And so for me, I think it's more than just one-way communication. It's how do we, fire up a network of communication so that we can prioritize who around us needs our help, and how we as individuals can help but not get in the way. I think that's been a concern for me in the past. Was I want to be helpful, but at the same time I don't want to be in the way for people that are doing this and helping others. And so it's that communication as a full circle rather than kind of one-way broadcasting, which is like where we're at today when it comes to disaster recovery.
Hopefully some of the insights here have sparked an idea in you or encouraged you to contribute to Call for Code. The great news is the deadline has been extended. You have until September 28th to make your submissions. And I cannot wait to see what inspiring ideas come out of this challenge and what we can do as a community to help those when their need is greatest.